Hey everyone, this is Alfred from The Prompted, and today we're looking at another N8N workflow and agent for your Shopify store that can easily save you thousands of dollars in wasted Facebook ad spend. And it does that by sending you Slack alerts whenever your Facebook ads gets a sudden spike in spending with poor performance so that you can easily address the issue right away. So this is what we're going to do in this video. First, we'll quickly look at what the agent does, and we'll talk about why this is needed and how it helps save so much money and headache. Second, we'll show you all the different features this workflow has once you have it set up. Third, I'll take you through how we built it so that you can use it too. And fourth and finally, we'll go over what we plan on doing next to make it even better. Okay, so let's get into it. All right, so we're starting off by just talking a little bit about what the workflow does and why it's so important. So let's take a look here. This is the workflow in N8N. And you can see there's quite a lot going on here. And I'll explain about it more later. But for now, all you need to know is that we're going to be grabbing data from Facebook, populating it into a spreadsheet like this, and then creating a chart so that we can see how the spend and conversion rates are changing over time. So you can see here, this blue line is how much we're spending. And then we've got this dotted line as a threshold. And the same thing here for purchases in green and conversion value in red. And so we can kind of watch how things are going. But on top of that, we're also going to be sending Slack alerts. So let's say, for example, we didn't meet our thresholds, right? So we overspent and we didn't get enough conversion value. So then it might send us some warnings. So right here, you can see that we're getting some warnings, and it's telling us that we've spent too much and we haven't gotten enough conversion value back. And once we get that Slack message, then we can go into our Facebook Ads Manager and address things right away. So why is this so important? Well, we can take a look at a few different examples. Our first example is from a member in our private program who speed ran all the way to their very first $11,000 day within 11 days of implementing our minimalist plan. Now, you can see within the first couple of days, they had a huge increase in spend, but it didn't result in any sales. And that can be really jarring, especially when you're first starting to spend more. Now, if we had this alert system, then we could have potentially mitigated some of the spend by addressing the overspend a little bit earlier than where we saw it here. Next, we have an example from one of our brands where we actually were having a really good day. So this was a Friday, this was a Thursday, September 26th. And you can see here that we were getting $5,000 in conversion value on $2,000 of spending for a ROAS of 2.3. But then on the Friday, we had much worse performance. We were getting approximately that same $5,000 in conversion value, but on a much higher spend rate, which resulted in a much lower ROAS. And then this is the Saturday. Again, we got about $5,000 in conversion value on $5,000 of spend with a 0.94 ROAS. But actually, most of the spend was in the morning. And I remember it very clearly because I remember checking our ads. We had already spent like over $4,000 at just 10 or 11 a.m. And I called Andrew right away, be like, hey, we got to do something about this. So we turned off the ads so that we could kind of kill off all of this overspending, and we only spent a little bit more for the rest of that day. And we were able to recover some of it because this ROAS number was even worse. And then in the following day, we kind of recovered back to over 2 ROAS. So you can see here that we spent we received $5,000 in conversion value on the $2,000 of spend. And so while we had 2 days that were performing quite well, it sandwiches 2 really poor performance days that actually wipes out any profits that we would have had in the good days. And it's not just happening for us or our members. You can actually see here a tweet from Dave, who helps run Bamboo Earth, which is a brand owned by Common Thread Collective, which is the agency owned by Taylor Holiday. And he's talking about how he's getting these huge spikes in spend. So um, you can see here within a 1 hour period, going from $20 per hour being spent to this 1 hour where $7,000 gets spent. And actually, it got even worse, right? Because even though he stopped the spend, it probably had already spent through, so the reporting was a little bit lagging behind. So you can see here that there's actually 10,000 for that 8 to 9, 8 a.m. to 9 a.m. period. And so this is something that we see all the time, right? This happened just last month to Bamboo Earth. It's happened to us a number of times throughout the year, and a lot of people will theorize that it's because of Facebook bugs, delivery bugs, right? Because when you're using cost caps, it's supposed to prevent overspending, but sometimes that cap just gets burst through, and you get a lot of spend all at once. So what can you do about it? Well, that's why we built this agent and this workflow, so that we have this extra layer of protection in case it starts to see the overspend. We can address it right away so that we can limit how much overspending actually happens. Okay, so now that we've talked about why we think these alerts are so important, let's take a look at the workflow and the agent to see how it works, how to use it, and what benefits it has. And once we've done that, then we'll get into actually building it. Okay, so this is the workflow I was showing you earlier, but we've actually made 3 separate workflows that all work together. So this is the main one where we're going to be collecting the data into the spreadsheet and graphing it. We have a second workflow which allows us to add slash commands into Slack so that we can pause or resume some of the alerts. And then we have an agent where we can talk to it and ask it about some of the current and previous performance, where it looks up through the logs and tells you information about it so that you don't have to look into every single one of these spreadsheets. Okay, so those are the workflows, but conceptually might be a little bit difficult to understand what all these conditions are, what's happening. So let's look at the data again, and I'll just talk you through what's happening. So what we're going to be doing is, in this case, we've set it to be 5 minutes. So every 5 minutes, we're going to get a data point, right? So you can see here, let's go to the data sheet. Every 5 minutes, we're going to get a data point, and then we're going to check the spend, right? So in this case, only 30 cents was spent in the 5 minutes. 10 cents was spent in that 5 minutes. But it starts to accelerate as the day goes along. And that becomes a little bit easier to see in this graphical format. So you can see here that as the day goes along, we're going to be spending more and more and more. So that's one aspect of things. The other aspect is how many purchases we're getting. So we got 2 sales at this point, 3 sales, 4 sales. And these are attributed sales, right? So they're not on Shopify, it'll show you your actual sales, but here in Facebook, it'll be the attributed sales to the spend from Facebook itself. And then you have your conversion value, which is the value of the sales that are attributed to Facebook, right? So in those 4 sales in this example here that Facebook recognized, it also recognized that you got $270 in revenue from those 4 sales. And so when we talk about overspending, we say it's actually spending more than a certain amount at poor performance. Because if you spent a lot, but the performance was good, so long as you have inventory, there's really no issue with that. You could spend as much as you can, right? It becomes an issue when you have either inventory concerns, right? You can't actually deliver on what you're selling, or and in this case, what we're addressing is your performance is bad, right? And so we have these dotted lines here. These dotted lines are to show you where we've set the threshold, And these are just examples here. This is not our true thresholds. Well, but in this example, we would show, let's say if this threshold was actually a little bit lower. So we've set it here 1,000. I'm just going to change this number to, let's call it 500. Okay, it's 500 now. And so now you can see here, we've crossed over this threshold, right? So this is where we say, hey, you've spent more than $500. You got to watch out, okay? And so in this time point, we've spent over $500, but we've made less than the $2,000 that we're trying to get to, right? So in this case, the moment we cross over this $500 and see that it's below 2,000, then it would trigger a warning for us to look at it, because this would be a signal that we're spending too much with poor performance. Now, where we were at before, just undo that. When we were in this state, you can see here, we never actually reach our spending threshold, which means at no point did we overspend. And on top of that, we're actually above our conversion value threshold, which means we're getting enough back on this spend, even if we had gotten up to the threshold, right? So we're looking at two different things. We're saying, are we spending too much? And have we not converted enough value, right? And so we look at those two things, we compare them, and then decide, are we going to send an alert or not? And so that's how it works. And that's what this workflow is doing. So as it runs, we're going to be able to see a few things. And so why don't I make a duplicate of this workflow? Let's call it testing demo. Just give it a different name. And we're just going to copy this because I'm going to use it elsewhere. So we'll duplicate. And then we have these two yellow boxes, which are where we're going to change some of our settings. And I'm going to change the file name right there so that our spreadsheet is going to have a different name. And then we have some timestamps here. This is where we name the spreadsheet tabs. So data, flags, logs. That's what you see here. Data, flags, logs. And sorry, this is the main one. Okay, so then let's come down here into this box. We have some more settings in here. So we have some timestamps again, our sheet names again, and this is where we set our thresholds. So let's do a low threshold, and daily spend. Actually, so we're saying that the spending threshold is going to be $10. So anything above that will be considered something we have to watch out for. And then we're going to make our purchase conversion threshold low, so that if it's below that value, then we know there's an issue. And then we'll change these cooldown times. So this is specifying how often we get data. We're going to make it much lower. Let's actually make it like this. And then 1 minute. So that we can get data coming in very quickly. Otherwise, we have to wait 5 minutes just to get one data point, which isn't what you probably won't stick around in the video if that was the case. So we're going to do this at just a few seconds. Let's just save that. And I'm going to run this workflow. And so once I run the workflow, it's going to start showing that we're working through it, right? So it's starting to work through these different nodes. And what we're doing here is we're actually creating the spreadsheet. We're creating the tabs. We're setting up the header rows and all of that. And then once it creates that file, which it just did right here, then we get a Slack message saying that we've created a new file and here it is. And so we can actually open that up. And you can see here, we've got our first data point right here. And Let's go back. And now it's going to collect data points every few seconds. And the reason why it's collecting data is because we're running through this loop where we check a few different things. So let me just zoom in on this a little bit. And we can see here how we start to check Facebook. We place the data into the spreadsheet, and then we run through a few checks. We check, do we have an alert yet? And then we check if we don't, then do we now have an alert, right? Is there a new alert based on this new data? If it's no, we don't meet the thresholds, then we just go along this path and just continue along. We set our alerts to, we have a flag that say no alerts are happening. And then we jump into this wait node. We wait a couple seconds in this case, but normally it's 5 minutes. And then go back to the start and do it again. But let's say the threshold is met. Then we actually go up here and then we check two things, right? We check whether or not the previous alert was within 30 minutes normally, but we change it to 1 minute. And the reason why we do that is because we don't want to be spammed by these warnings so often. So what we do is we say, hey, have we already received alert within the past 30 minutes or whatever value you want? If so, don't send it. We've already received it. You can make that smaller or larger if you want to just get continually hit by the warning, then you can do that. Or you can, keep it a little bit more quiet and space them out. That's up to you. But that's what's happening here. And then we again go back through the loop and do it again. So if we go back to our spreadsheet now, we can see here we've been collecting data, right? Now it's all the same because this is all within the span of a really short time period as I'm recording, right? So just a few minutes, but we're still collecting the data. And so it's just going to create this straight line here, which is not so interesting. The other thing you'll notice is that we actually haven't hit the thresholds because I said more than $10 of spend, but less than $100 in conversion value. And that's not the case here. So why don't I just kill this run? Let's just go to executions and let's stop this. Okay, so I'm going to change the threshold values again. And this time, instead of making it 100, let's make it 1,000. So what this means is we have to spend, if we have spent more than $10 and have less than $1,000 in conversion value, which is what it's showing here, then we hit the threshold, right? And so let's just do that again. We'll test the workflow and we'll show what happens. Okay, so it's running through. We've created a file, right? And here we go. We have our warning, right? Warning, Facebook spend alert triggered. Okay, so now we're saying, look, we have spent $177, which is greater than the $10 threshold. And our conversion value is 105, which is less than 1,000. So that means we need to address something because it's our warning got hit. And when we visit our spreadsheet, you can see here in the logs that we actually log when this warning occurs. And we now have a flag here. Well, actually, we'll talk about the flag in a second. But in our logs, we have that this occurred, right? And so now, every minute, we are going to get an alert that says, hey, the alert is still active. Now, it's a 1 minute alert because of the setting that we set, right? Remember how originally I said it's 30 minutes? Well, I changed it, right? Because I wanted these messages to come a little bit more frequently. during this recording. But normally I would set it to something bigger, like 15 or 30 minutes, so that you're not spammed so much. But if you think even this is too much, then you can actually pause the alerts. And that's what this /pause is for, right? So why don't I show you how that works? So this is this workflow here. This workflow allows us to receive / commands and pause these alerts because, let's say, for example, you've actually already addressed this problem, right? You turned off the ads for the day. You're not going to be spending anymore. But because we're still collecting data and because your thresholds are still met, it's going to keep thinking, hey, something's wrong. So we can actually just pause them so that it doesn't bug us anymore. And all you have to do in order to do that is just hit pause, right? We'll pause the alerts, and then we send that in, and then it'll tell us that, oh, sorry, I need to actually activate it. Because these are, I didn't activate the workflow, so you need to press test workflow before it actually receives anything. So we'll hit pause, right? The pause command gets received, and it's going to work through this workflow and tell us, okay, pause flag set to true. And that means that we've now paused the alerts. And so now we don't have to receive these alerts for the remainder of the day. Okay, so that's how the main workflow works. And now we also have an agent part of this. And so what the agent is going to be doing is it's going to be looking at our some of the historical data that we've collected, and it's going to tell us whether or not our thresholds are met or what how much spend we've had. So let's say, for example, we want to see how today is doing. So we can say, we have to test workflow first, and then we can say at Facebook Spend Alerts app, what is the ad spend today? And you can see that it's working through. The agent's checking the spreadsheets. And then it's going to let us know that we've spent $178.43. You can access the detailed data here. And it gives us the spreadsheet of today's data, right? It's like, okay, great. What about conversion value? Oh, sorry. We need to run the test workflow first. And let's do that again. Let's just copy and paste that message again. We just, again, have to turn on test workflow because we haven't activated it right now for testing purposes. Okay, so, and it's 105, right? And so we can just click on the link here to go to the file, and it will take us to where the data lives, where we can see there's 178 and the 105 spent there. But we could also find out what's going on other days. So let's say we don't want to have to go search through all of our files. Maybe we want to know what happened yesterday. What was the spend and conversion value yesterday? Then it'll work through again to check all the different the files, and it'll tell us that we spent $800 and we got $2,200 in conversion value. We can ask, was the threshold triggered yesterday? Let's do that, and then we will see if the threshold was triggered. And no, it was not, right? Because it actually did quite well yesterday, which is actually what we were looking at right here, which is this data, right? Remember, we were looking at this. So threshold was not triggered. And the agent tells us that we don't have to go and check this ourselves, even though we can if we want. And so that's our Facebook alerts system. It's a workflow and agent working together. And there's a lot of benefits with doing it this way that we don't normally get by either checking manually or using Facebook ads rules. And the first thing is that you get a tighter sampling rate. So we can set it to every 5 minutes, which I found is more often more than we need because it doesn't update uh, more frequently than 5 minutes. But if you're using the Facebook ads rules, it only checks every 30 minutes. So a lot can happen within a 30-minute period, as we saw earlier from Bamboo Earth, that in a 1 hour period, they spent $10,000. So being able to check every 5 minutes could have cut that down by, a tenth, right? So they could have potentially saved a lot of money there. Next, you have sort of a graphical interface, right? When you're looking at the Facebook Ads Manager, normally you're just looking at numbers, but we can actually chart out how spend is happening over time so that you don't have to look at these numbers, but you actually see these lines, right, that are very visual, help us understand what's happening. And then we've also built the workflow to be more optimized with N8N because with N8N, you get charged based on executions, but what we're doing is we're looping through so that each day is a single execution. So we're really efficient with how the executions are happening. And then finally, we have some different ways to interface with it by adding an agent in to check in on how things are doing. So you don't have to open up all these different files. We have added these slash commands to pause alerts if you don't need so many at that time. So we've built quite a few different things in here, and we're really happy with how it's turned out. And we actually still have a lot more that we want to add on top of it to make it even better. So we will talk about that in a second. But first, why don't I show you how we actually put this together so that you can use it too. If you want to save yourself some time from implementing this by using a template of these workflows, then just sign up for our email newsletter. Link is in the description below. And respond to any one of our emails, and we'll get back to you on more information on how you can get that. Okay, so we're looking at the workflows again, and I'll take you through how each one of them works, and I'll explain the nodes so that you can just recreate it. Let's start off with the Facebook, with the agent, right? So the first thing you're going to need to do is connect the Slack trigger. We're actually going to need to connect a bunch of different tools, right? So there's Slack, Google Sheets, Google Drive, Facebook. We're not going to get into how to get your tokens or the credentials to connect with N8N in this video. We will be releasing a video on how to connect different tools, but for now, we're going to leave that out and just show you how to create these workflows here. So we have first a Slack trigger, and you connect your credentials, right? So that you can get that. And we're going to trigger on a bot or app mention. And what that means is when we come to our Slack, we have to use @ in this case, N8N Facebook spend alerts. So that's the app name. So we have to do an @ message to direct the message towards them so that they know that, hey, I need to trigger on that. And then we specify the actual channel ID, which you can find up here, and you can find it down there right there. So this specifies that when the app gets mentioned in this channel, then it gets triggered, right? And then we have our agent. Our agent receives the message, right? Was the trigger threshold triggered yesterday, right? That text message gets placed in here. And then we have a system message, which is essentially the system prompt for the AI agent. And this is what we have here as our prompt. I'm not going to read through the whole thing, but essentially it's just saying, hey, you're a helpful agent, assistant. This is the date, and you have these different tools available. This is how you're going to use these tools. So if you want to look a little bit more on how that all works, just pause that and take a look. And then we have our chat model. So we're connecting OpenAI. We're using GPT-4o Mini, which is one of the cheaper models. We found that it's actually very, it's a very good one, particularly for how cheap it is. And so I personally like to use that more often than not. We have a little bit of a memory just to keep track of the messages going in and out. So you can see here, we've got a bit of a memory of the different the messages. We're keeping up to 5, which is good enough for what we're doing, but you can always increase it if you need a longer context window. And then we have our tools set up, right? So we've got Google Drive. So the way the Google Drive is set up is that we're searching through files and folders. And for the search query and for how many files we're returning, we're actually going to have it automatically determined by the model, which is our AI agent, right? Who's going to determine what values are going to be set there. And that's because we've prompted it to say, well, the file format is going to look like this, and the variable is actually going to be the date, right? So you're going to search through our files based on these dates, and you're going to come up with the spreadsheet ID, which can then be passed on to Google Sheets tool, which again, where the ID is going to be determined by the model by searching through it with the Google Drive tool, and then we have also told the AI agent everything it needs to know about the Google Sheet, like what columns it has, what tabs it has, what information's found on those tabs, so it knows what to look for and give us the information that we want, like how much we've spent and what the conversion value is for the different days. And so that's how the agent works. And we also gave it a calculator to do some calculations. That's probably more for the future because most of the data it needs right now is in the spreadsheet itself. And then we output it all back to Slack again, right? And so we've seen all the different messages already, but we've set it up to just send back to Slack. Okay. Next, let's take a look at our Slack commands. This is where we can place, we can do /pause or /unpause to resume our alerts, right? And so the purpose of this is to prevent spamming into our Slack channels if we don't want it. And the reason we're using Slack / commands is to limit the number of executions, right? Because if we're looking for a message, then it's going to check every single message in the Slack channel to see whether it has some sort of command that you're looking for. Instead, if it's a / command, it's a very specific a webhook, essentially, to say only on this type of command are we going to drive this execution. And that way we can really save the number of executions that we're using in our N8N subscriptions. Now, what this does, essentially, it's the exact same thing for this row as it is for this row. This one's for pause and this one's for unpause. But what we're looking for is first that the webhook gets triggered, and then we give it a response, right? We acknowledge that we received the event, right? So we tell Slack to just pause command receive. So I think we got one up here somewhere earlier, pause command received, right? So we just acknowledge that we received the command. And then what we do is we set what today's date is. Essentially, it's the file name that we're looking for, right? It's the file name for today because it's the only active file that's adding data, right? So we're logging data right now. That's the only one that we're going to need to work with. And then sorry, I skipped a node. So we search for that file. It may return multiple, right? Because in this case, we've got multiple that has a similar file name because remember this testing demo one that we just created earlier in this video? So we have these like different files that might come up. We use this code to find the exact match that we're looking for. So it finds the one file that we're looking for, which is this one. And then we ask, does the file exist? In this case, yes. If it doesn't, then we actually send a Slack message to say we can't find it. But in this case, it can. So we use the Google Sheets node using the ID that we have back here, right? And then we're looking on the flags tab. So let's pull open a spreadsheet again, right? So on the flags tab, we are looking here to see what is the current flag status, because we need to grab all this information. So we see that's currently false, and here are the current timestamps. And then in this set node, we say what we want the new values to be. So in this case, we are still going to use the same row number, but we're going to change the timestamp to a new one. And we're going to change the pause flag to true, right? So this is the output that we get from this. And then we use our Google Sheets node again, except this time it's updating the row, and we set all of our new values in here, and then we output the result, right? And then we say, okay, we set our flag to true, right? There it is. We set our flag to true, and we output that back to Slack. So we probably find right here. So we set it back to true, and there we go. So that's how that works. And then we have the exact same process with unpausing it, right? So we set it back to false, but it's essentially the same process. Okay, and then finally we have our main workflow here. So this is the one where we're grabbing the data every 5 minutes and putting it into the spreadsheet, creating the charts so that we can see everything that's happening. So how does this thing work? All right, so first off, we have the trigger node. Right now I have it as when clicking test workflow. That's because I'm trying to show you this video, so it's a little bit easier to test it like that. But what we'd actually be using is we'd be using a scheduled trigger. So every day at 12 a.m. or 12:01 a.m., whatever you like, we will start the new day with a trigger, and we'll start collecting right after midnight, right? So then that way we can have our data start right away at the beginning of the day, and we can see how it changes over time. And like I mentioned earlier, we're going to have one of these sheets per day. So every day is a new sheet. That way they're self-contained, and we can address our issues on a day-by-day basis. We also have a history of how our data is performing over day by day. Okay, next we have sort of this set node for all of our settings. We have a few different things in here. We've set what today's date is, what tomorrow's date is, what time we started, and what the file names are. So all of this is just to be used in later nodes, right? And so we can refer back to this node here. And then we also set what the sheet names are. Next, we check whether or not the file exists, right? So we have the file name that we set in the previous node, so we're going to check for that. And then we might get multiple responses. So we use this code here to determine which one has an exact match, and we output that one. And then we take that match and we see, does the file exist or does it not? If it exists, we just skip all of this and go straight to starting to add data to it. And the reason is because maybe you had created the file, you started it, but for whatever reason, you stopped collecting data. So maybe the workflow failed, or you had to stop it to make a change or something. So we just don't continuously create a new file. We can continue to append to the existing file that we have. But in most cases, you're actually creating a new file. And so we'll follow down this path here. And then in this path, we're going to first create the file, right? So we're going to create the file with the file name that we defined earlier up here. And then we have to set the header row, right? So we're going to set all the headers, right? So date, time, spend, purchase, conversion value, all of that. These are the headers that we're setting up here. And then next, we're adding that header row to the actual sheet, right? So it shows up. And then next we add. Okay, the next step's a little bit of a workaround, so it might get a little bit complicated. So why don't I first explain what I'm doing, and then I'll take you through it. So the next couple steps are to actually create the chart right here. And so we want to create the chart. So we create the tab, we create the chart, and then we also want to color the lines. But the problem is you can't actually set the chart settings until there's a couple data points in. So what we're doing here is we're adding 2 rows of dummy data. We're creating the chart, we're setting the chart settings, and then we're just going to delete these 2 dummy data rows that we created earlier, right? So we create a dummy row, we just essentially say 0, 0, zeros, a bunch of zeros, and then we do the same thing here with a bunch of zeros. And then we create the chart itself, right? So we do an HTTP request on the spreadsheet that we got earlier, right? Based on the one that we created. And then we send our request with all of these different settings to say what kind of chart we want to make. And then we send a second one to edit the chart, right? With editing, make sure it's all exactly how we want it. And then we delete those 2 rows that we created, right? So those starting on row 2, we just delete those 2 rows again. And that way it actually formats the chart properly. Okay, so next, we create the logs sheet. So that's this one right here, right? So this is where if there's a warning, it'll start to log it into here. And for that, we create the sheet first, and then we specify what the headers are, which are timestamp and thresh logs. And then we add those headers to the sheet. In this case, we specify the values, but they're just empty, right? We have empty values. And then next, we're creating the flags sheet, right? So the flags sheet was to specify whether or not we're going to be pausing our warnings for the day, right? So that's whether we toggle this false or true based on this workflow here. And so similarly, we create the headers. We create the sheet first, then we create the headers. We set the false and the timestamp, and then we put that data into Google Sheets. And finally, we move, And then finally, we move the file to the folder we want to put it in. We have a specific folder in Google Drive for all of that. And then we let our user know that everything, the file was created and where to find it, right? So that's what we did up here, right? So today's file, we started the workflow at this time, and then here's today's file. And so all of that is the preparation step, right? So all of that is just to create the initial file, setting all of it up so that we can then loop through and add data to it. So that's what we're going to do now. So now we have a check. Is it the end of the day, right? If it is, then we say a note, hey, day's over. And then all we have to do is wait for the next day to start before we trigger a new file and we start the process all over again. Now, if it's not the end of the day, then we go through and we start looping. So the first step is actually one where we are checking a few different values. So we've got a code alert active, code start time, code cool time. And we have a few different places that we're looking, right? So the first place is actually this node here, where we set the initial values. But once you start looping, then you actually don't have access to this anymore. And so that's where it starts getting set in a different spot in the loop. So we just have this code to check in the 2 different spots and use the one that it finds. And next, we have our settings, right? So we can set today, the current time, the file name, data sheet, all this stuff are settings that we're using later on in the loops. So we have one central location where we can set everything so we know where to go if we want to change settings. And so you saw me earlier change the interval times and also the thresholds. So that's what this is for. And you can adapt those numbers for your brand. Okay, next, we have an HTTP request. So this is where we're grabbing the Facebook data via the API, right? And we are going to be uh, looking for these values here: spend, actions, and action values. So that's going to be the spend, the purchases, and the purchase conversion value that we're going to be getting. And we're also setting the time frame to be today, right? We're always going to be looking one day at a time. Okay, next we will output a message saying whether or not, if it failed, then we output a message to Slack saying, hey, didn't work. If it works, then we're actually going to start adding the data to our Google Sheet. So first we got to look for the file name, right? So we got to look for the file that we want to add the data to so that we can get the ID of the spreadsheet. So then we place the ID in here, and then we start adding the data to our spreadsheet, right? So we can add the date, time, the spend, the purchases, and we're grabbing all of this data from the output of our API request to Facebook, right? And so that's how we end up getting all of this data added to our sheet, right? So we grab it from there, and sorry, wrong one, and we place it into here. And then next, we're going to be checking if our alerts are active. So if we've paused our alerts, then we just say, well, you know what? If it's paused, then we don't really need to check if the threshold's met or not, because we don't, the user has already asked us to not send us any more information in Slack. So we're just going to skip all of this and then just collect data again, right? So that's if the flag right here is set to true, right? We've paused everything. Then we skip all of our checks and just run again and collect data all over again. Now, if we haven't turned off our alerts, then the next step is to check whether our thresholds are met, right? So this is when, we're overspending or not. If everything is good, then we can skip everything. And then we say that there's no current alert going on, right? There's no threshold being met. We have a flag that says, hey, don't worry about spending right now. Everything's all good. So we just turn that to inactive, right? So we can say alert active is false. And then again, we just go through and wait all over again. I'll talk about this merge in a second. Also, this code node, we'll talk about that in a second. Okay, now if there is an alert that's currently active, if there's a threshold that's met, right? So this in this case is false, but here, okay, we've spent a lot, but we haven't got a lot of revenue from that spend. Then we actually go down this branch. And this branch down here is the first time we notice that threshold's met. And up here is any subsequent time, right? And we use the flag that I was talking about, inactive alert, to determine whether or not that's happened or not. So that's why this is set here and why we're also setting it here as well, right? So we're saying that actually alert active is true in this case. That's for this if node here. Okay, so the first time it notices it, what we're going to be doing is we're going to say, hey, warning, this is all the information. Here's how much you're spending. Here's how much money you've made on it. Here's the thresholds that you set and why we're not quite meeting it. We take that message and we put it into Google Sheets, into our log, right? In this case right here, this file doesn't have one, but I showed you earlier one that did. And then we go into Slack and we also give the message that, hey, this is what's going on, so that you can get that notification on your phone and your computer so that you can go jump into your Facebook ads right away, double check if anything that you need to address right now. And then, like I said earlier, we set our values here, right? So we trigger this to true. We set what time the alert occurred, and then what time this cooldown is. Now, what's happening here is we have we're checking the data every 5 minutes. And if the threshold gets met, do you want a message to occur every 5 minutes? Maybe you do, in which case you can just set your cooldown period to 5 minutes. But if that's too much, you can actually space them out. You can say every 30 minutes, if it's still true, then send me a message. That way you can kind of you have two ways of controlling how the alerts come to you in Slack. One is with the cooldown, right? You can space them out. And two, using the pause, right? So that's two different ways. And then finally, if the cooldown has elapsed, then we actually send a new message, right? Because if the cooldown hasn't, then we actually skip sending a message and we just wait for the 30 minutes and then once the 30 minutes pass, then you can actually go down this route and send the message. And then finally, we have to bring everything together, right? That's why we have this merge node, because depending on the path you take, you're going to actually feed it different data. But the variables are all the same. It's just their values are different. So you use the merge node to grab the one that actually is there, and then we use this code node to pick the right value that we need, and then we pass it back through the loop and start the loop all over again. And so in the end, what we get is a data sheet like this with all these data coming in. We get a chart that shows us how things are progressing. And then we have some logs on whether or not our thresholds were triggered and what time they happened. And so that's essentially the meat of that workflow. Okay, so that's our Facebook ads alert system to help control overspending. We think every Facebook ad account should be using this because it's simple to set up and can save you thousands of dollars within even 1 hour, right? We've seen how Bamboo Earth has spent $10,000 within 1 hour. And we can actually, if they were using this type of alert system, maybe they could have capped that to a few $100s or $1,000 and saved 90% of that overspent. Now, there's a few extra things that we would do to make this workflow and AI agent even better. So the first thing is borrowing some concepts from day trading, where maybe you want to add some stop losses based on momentum. So right now, we're looking at daily ad spend over the course of the day. But maybe for the first 12 hours of the day, you have really efficient spend, and something happens in the middle where all of a sudden your efficiency drops. Now, right now, and even using Facebook ads rules, you don't have any control over looking at the past, say, 2 hours. It'll just basically be inefficient until the whole day is inefficient, when really maybe it only started being inefficient at noon. So what we want to do is we actually want to add some time control so you can window off window off hours of the day, so that you can say, maybe for the past 2 hours, if spend is this much and conversion value is this much, then send the alert, right? Hey, in the past 2 hours, you've spent $200, but you've only got $50 of conversion value. When that happens, you can send the alert, and then you can take a look to see whether or not there's actually something concerning that you want to address even sooner than just waiting for the whole day to tank, and you can actually preserve a good day. The second thing is actually to take it the next step, which is you have your daily spend thresholds, your time windowed spend thresholds, and actually have, instead of just an alert, we actually have an action system that turns off your ads or adjusts your ad. You change your budgets on the ad. Do these things automatically so that you don't even need to go in and do it yourself, because hey, let's face it, if we see something like what Bamboo Earth saw, where we saw $10,000 of spend in a single hour, maybe as humans, we just can't react fast enough, right? By the time you get that message, you even log in and get everything, maybe that money's already gone. So if you can have the system automatically pause things or make an adjustment, then you could cut off that overspend immediately. So those are some of the things that we're thinking about, some of the things that we'd like to add to this agent and to this workflow that we think could be really beneficial to all brands, especially when Facebook can act funny and kind of like bug out with these overspending days. So if you want to see that, then definitely subscribe to the channel. Check out our free email newsletter. We'll be sharing more content like this, and we'll be sending updates on when some of these agents are coming out. So check those two things out. For the free email newsletter, you can sign up with the link below in the description. But that's it for today. Thanks, and I'll see you in the next one.